Yo, what's going on, Dragon Ballers? Welcome back to another Top Cut breakdown. There was a Top Cut Events premier online webcam tournament that took place over the weekend. A lot of you guys may not have heard of it. There wasn't a ton of coverage on this tournament. Some of the players did stream their gameplay during the tournament. Shout out to Aspira, who also plays very, very well this tournament. I know he streamed it, but if you guys didn't hear about it, I don't really blame you. There wasn't a ton of coverage for this tournament. It actually was kind of tough for me to find out the top placing decks. I was only able to find the top 7 placing lists. I couldn't find that pesky 8th place list. If you guys know who got 8th place at this tournament, post it down in the comments below. But in this video, we're going over the top 7 from that tournament. And it was actually a really crazy top 7, like super unexpected. When you kind of think the format is solved, this tournament and this top 7 really just throws like a wrench in things because it was very, very unexpected. But as we get into it, guys, if you are new here, make sure to subscribe, hit that bell so you don't miss a video. And if you want to help the channel out, there are tons of ways down in the description to do so. Make sure to check out the Gemmy app and the Patreon for your one-on-one coaching with yours truly, as well as your cross-world competitive content. Make sure to use deck protection down in the description for your sleeves, deck boxes, binders, all that good stuff. And finally, guys, use TCG Player down in the description if you want to buy or pre-order any Dragon Ball Super cards, especially ones that you see or hear about in this video. Thank you guys all so much for the support. Really does help out a great deal. That being said, let's get started. So this insane top 7, super unexpected. Tell me down below if you guys ever expected to see a top 7 like this in this format. We had 3 Invoker, 2 Vegex, 1 Syn Shenron, and 1 Toppo. So obviously it's not an even number, but about 50% of this top cut was so unexpected. We haven't seen Invoker in a top cut since set 10 format began, and that's really, really saying something. So we'll just get right off the bat and talk about Invoker. Now, I do want to talk about Aspira's Invoker experience specifically. I'm pretty sure he got 4th place with Invoker. Shout out to him. I know he also streamed his gameplay during the tournament, which is pretty awesome to see. He mentioned in his tournament report that aggro was everywhere. If I'm quoting him right, I'm pretty sure he said that 4 of his Swiss matchups were Reboot Gohan, which any aggro deck, when you look at Reboot Gohan or Vegex, those are going to be pretty negative matchups for Invoker. But to see that, he's able to pilot through that 4 different Reboot Gohans, that's actually pretty nutty. I'm pretty sure he also played against 1 Vegex, if I'm not mistaken. So to run that type of tournament through all those aggro decks, through 4 or 5 bad matchups, is really, really saying something in my opinion. But that just kind of speaks to Invoker in this top cut. If aggro was everywhere, how did so much control make this top cut, and how did no mid-range make this top cut? It's actually kind of mind-boggling if you think about it. Now there are a few things I do want to get out there. It was definitely a smaller tournament, but that's basically the case with all the tournaments we've been seeing lately, whether they're online, whether they're webcam tournaments, or whether they're in person. They've all been on the smaller end, like maybe maxing out at 60 players if they're lucky, usually around the 40 player or less range. But the other thing is, this is a webcam tournament. Now, I do want to say that I think the webcam tournaments are probably the least secure when it comes to these online premier events. And don't get me wrong, like, this is the state of the world that we're in. We should be grateful that we have any tournaments to play in general. But I'm just saying, when you compare the IRL events to the untap events to the webcam events, I do want to say the webcam events are a little bit less secure than most other events, and that can be anywhere from like a camera issue, a connection issue, an online issue, which you can of course have with untap, but at least untap kind of like saves the game state when things go awry like that. You never know when something's going to go wrong with a camera or the internet, and then someone shifts the board around, right? Intentionally or unintentionally. Now, I'm not saying anyone in this tournament was cheating or playing unfairly. There was no reports of that from what I understood. I'm just saying that we do have to look at this tournament with a grain of salt, and Aspira mentioned the same thing as well, but I do have to give credit where credit is due. Man, like, playing Invoker through 5 aggro decks and still, getting into the 1st, 3rd, and 4th place with this deck is unbelievable. Again, it really just boggles my mind that we didn't see any mid-range, and we kind of know this already. We kind of know that aggro is the king of the format, but how does Invoker deal with that, right? So Invoker, a lot of these lists in this event were playing for Toppo. Now, Toppo is always a card that's kind of been in and out of the main deck in Invoker. Now, keep in mind also, this was a best of 1 tournament. So with that in mind, I think it was the right play for Invoker to go just 4 main deck Toppos. You have to be able to see it against aggro, like, Reboot Gohan or Vegex on the wrong turn. If you don't have a Toppo, you're essentially dead in the water. And I know for Aspira, just from watching his tournament report, it took sometimes multiple Toppos for him to stave off some of that insane aggression. But Toppo is going to be one of the workhorses in the deck if you want to play Invoker this format. Now, what are the other ways that this deck is winning? Well, it's not too, innovative, I want to say, from what we've seen from Invoker in the past. You have the burn package, you have Catastrophic Blow with the Rival Seeker Goku going into your 6-drop Goku, and then we have the Apex SCR, right? Now, maybe here's the thing. Maybe since it was a best-of-1 tournament, maybe Invoker was a little bit more advantaged in some of the matchups. Not like Aspira playing against 5 aggro decks, but maybe the other Invoker decks in the room, if they played against other control matchups, if they played against other mid-range matchups, maybe being best-of-1, maybe this is a really good opportunity to play Invoker, because for the burn damage, right, how do you interact with it? Well, it's kind of tough to interact with it, because if you're playing blue or green, you have pretty good interaction with Rival Seeker. You can either trunks it back to their hand when they hardcast it, or you can play Frieza Charismatic Villain and just pop it. But other decks like red and yellow in particular, they don't have the best ways to deal with the burn and to deal with the aggro like that. And black too, black has virtually no counterplay when it comes to Rival Seeker. And then how do you deal with Apex SCR, right? Well, you have to have an abundance of negates. That's just the name of the game when they drop Apex on you. There's really no stopping Apex's effects because it is an activate main that just blanks all of your leader skills, all of your battle card skills. The only thing you have to stop Apex are hard negates. And maybe in best of 1, we don't see as many players playing these hard negates. And I bet you too that players weren't playing drop negates. Now, I could be totally wrong on that. I didn't see a ton of deck lists from this event, but it's kind of been a rule of thumb in this format that you should play drop negates because of decks like Invoker that can snipe the answers out of your hand. But if you happen to have that drop negate in your hand and they want to snipe it, well, you're still going to be safe from the Apex SCR. But what happens is, you know, when a player doesn't see Invoker for a long time, when a player doesn't see Reboot Gohan in the format for a long time, players start to, you know, kind of take it for granted and not main deck those drop negates or not main deck those release from evils, you know, whatever cards they need to beat those really bad matchups. If they're not seen in the format, people kind of just stop playing them. And I can't blame players for that. That's actually a good thing in the sense that they're shifting with the meta, they're making meta calls. But when you have an abundance of players that play a deck like Invoker, and if you're not prepared for it with your drop negates or ways to interact with Rival Seeker, well, you are going to pay for it, especially in a best of 1, because you don't have the luxury of putting those cards in the side deck and, you know, hoping, you know, you can say Invoker will take game 1 off of you, but then you don't have the ability to come back games 2 and 3. So those are really important things to think about. I would bet you that the lack of drop negates was a big thing for Invoker here, but, you know, the 4 Toppo, that's going to stall you pretty hard into the late game. And that's another thing too, there's not too much interaction with Toppo in the format. The only real deck that has interaction with Toppo is going to be blue. Now, I will say Reboot Gohan does have a good way to interact with Toppo in the form of Focus Breakthrough. But besides that, again, if Reboot Gohan wasn't expecting Toppo, because not many players are playing red this format, we've talked about it many times, Koitsukai, that is seeing a ton of play in the main deck of Vegex and the side decks of a lot of other decks, that pretty much stops red from playing the game entirely. So we're not seeing like mono red decks, we're not seeing red yellow decks right now. So people may not have prepped accordingly for Toppos, and that may have been another reason why Invoker is able to dominate this format. This is a lot of speculation, but from what I'm kind of gathering here, it seems like there could have been many reasons why people were able to succeed with Invoker this tournament. It could have been, again, the lack of Toppo interaction. It could have been the lack of Rival Seeker burn interaction. Could have been the lack of preparation for the Apex Victory Strike. Nonetheless, congratulations to these players. Job well done, you know, and showing out real well with Invoker. So next up, we'll talk about Vegex. This was definitely a more expected deck to see in this top cut. Vegex has been running rampant, you know, for tournaments and tournaments and tournaments. The last 2 tournaments I actually covered, Vegex made 3 slots out of the top cut, and in the All-Star Showdown last time I covered a tournament, that actually went on to win in a Vegex versus Vegex finals match. And since that happened, people have definitely been saying the format is more on the solve side, and it really just has seemed like Vegex is arguably the #1 deck right now. It's just so powerful in what it can do. It plays battle cards for free. You know, turn 1 you can plus anywhere from 3 to 5 cards depending on what happens with your turn. It is really insane. It is very RNG dependent, but the deck is built in such a way where, you know, milling 10 cards in 1 turn on your turn 1 or turn 2, that's going to give you a lot more of that consistency boost to play your time agents, to play your Supreme Kais of Time, the ability to recycle your Bibbities. That's also more consistency. You know, you can definitely get bad mills. You can definitely mill in such a way that, you know, you're milling key pieces. But when you can recycle these things, when you can add these things back, and when you can accelerate your mills, you're gonna be in a pretty good spot. So that being said, I don't think anyone's surprised that Vegex did make this top cut, but I will say, with Vegex being so present in this top cut, I will say I am again surprised about no mid-range and about no green rather. I think green has a pretty good Vegex matchup, but I guess when you have this many control decks in the format, I mean, the rest of the decks we'll talk about today are going to be control. I guess it's going to put these mid-range decks in a pretty bad spot. So Vegex being the aggro deck, it was able to sneak in there to the top cut, dominated by control, and that just makes a little bit of sense, right? Because aggro, especially Vegex, is typically going to have a pretty good matchup against control. Next up, we'll talk about Syn Shenron, another somewhat expected deck. This deck is like hit or miss. Sometimes it makes top cut, sometimes it doesn't, but it's definitely not surprising to see it here in the top cut. But again, when you have a ton of decks like Vegex, I guess maybe not so much like Reboot Gohan, because yellow actually does answer Reboot Gohan quite hard with Release from Evil. So that being the case, if there were a ton of Reboot Gohans, which this is actually another thing when you talk about the webcam tournaments where you actually have to own all the cards, and a lot of these online tournaments too, you do have to own all the cards as well. But Aspira actually made a really good point in saying that these players, they own Reboot Gohan because it's a very cheap and competitive aggro deck, right? You don't need a super fancy SCR, you don't need a ton of fancy main deck cards like Obuni or Rebrians, anything like that. So these players having access to Reboot Gohan, that could have been one of the, you know, contributing factors to why it was played so much. But Syn Shenron in a field full of Reboot Gohan is going to have just an absolute field day going against that, right? It's just going to be honestly a pretty easy day for Syn Shenron when there's a ton of Reboot Gohan like that. And it can do well against Vegex as well. The thing with Vegex versus Syn Shenron is it's whoever can turn the corner first, right? If Vegex can make the game miserable for Syn, you know, the first 3-4 turns of the game, Syn's going to be in a bad spot. But if Syn can get to turn 6, well, Vegex is pretty much dead in the water unless they're main decking a card like Fu Shrouded Mystery, right? So the next deck I want to talk about, the most unexpected deck I think anyone could have possibly, you know, thought would be in this top cut, and that's going to be Toppo. I guess there is a universe where, you know, Toppo wins all the dice rolls. Toppo can search out its Unison with the 1-drop casserole and then play it on turn 2 and awaken. That is going to give you a good shot against Reboot Gohan and a good shot against Vegex. Much more so against Vegex than Reboot Gohan, because when you're limiting Vegex to play 1 battle card per turn, I will say you are limiting a lot of what Vegex can do. So again, I would say in my head, this had to have gone very, very well for this Toppo player in terms of die rolls, in terms of finding their Unisons on time, getting that turn 2 awaken, and then limiting your opponent's plays. In that universe, which may have been this very universe, I think that that's what's going to lead Toppo down to a victory like that. But besides that, you're just playing yellow good cards, you're playing Raiders War Cries, you're playing Bergamos, you're playing Zamasu super combos, you're playing honestly most of the stuff that Gotenks would probably play, but you're playing a more control-oriented leader that is much more reliant on seeing a Unison than Gotenks is. But when you do see that Unison, you're going to have a pretty big payoff against a deck like Vegex. So guys, once again, sorry I can only get the top 7. This tournament was very difficult to find info on, but definitely drop the comments below if you have more information from this tournament. If you have anything else you want to say contributing to it, if you played in it, let us know how it was. Thanks for watching, guys. I will see you next time.